Hello and welcome to The Ring, Euronews' weekly debate show broadcasting from the European Parliament here in Brussels. I'm Stefan Grobe. On The Ring, elected members of the European Parliament go face-to-face on some of the biggest issues facing the EU. Today, we're going to talk about the outcome of the Hungarian election and what it means for Europe. Luis Albertos has more.
Péter Magyar's landslide victory in Hungary's parliamentary elections on Sunday has sparked renewed optimism in Brussels. After years of Viktor Orban's controversial rule, the change in government has raised hopes that previously stalled EU support for Ukraine may finally be unblocked. While the European Union faces increasing global challenges, from Ukraine to the Middle East, its foreign policy responses often appear slow and fragmented, raising doubts about whether its current structure remains fit for purpose. A central point of debate lies in the EU's decision-making, particularly the requirement for unanimity. Nevertheless, resistance from some countries to reform these rules shows how fragmented the bloc is. What does Orban's defeat mean for the future of the EU? Beyond potential improvement in relations with Hungary, the Union still faces a broader question. Does it need radical reform to avoid being sidelined on the global stage?
A lot to unpack here for our contenders, and here they are.
Daniel Freund, a German MEP from the Greens European Free Alliance group. He serves on the Committee on Budgetary Control and Constitutional Affairs and is a vocal advocate for stronger EU institutions and stricter oversight of EU funds. A fierce defender of a federal Europe, he said, "The unanimity principle is a security risk for Europe. More democracy, more European security, and less blackmailing by autocrats. Orban is history, the end of the corrupt dictator." Sander Smit, a Dutch MEP from the European Conservatives and Reformists group. He serves on the Committee on Constitutional Affairs. Regarding the result of the elections in Hungary, he said, "We must respect that the new Hungarian government has received a strong mandate from its citizens with a conservative agenda of national sovereignty, anti-Green Deal, and anti-immigration positions. Sustainable EU decision-making cannot rely on bypassing national democracy."
So let me welcome to The Ring Daniel Freund and Sander Smit. Great to have you here. Good to see you both. Now, the aim of The Ring is to offer our viewers a glimpse at European Parliament debates, so you should feel right at home. Are you ready?
Yes. We're ready.
All right, so let's kick it off with the stunner of the week, the election in Hungary. Sander, was there anything surprising in the outcome?
Not very surprising. I was satisfied. I think the Hungarian people has clearly spoken, has taken a stance about their future, what they want in the new leadership, and they clearly wanted a new leader after 16 years of Viktor Orban.
Well, Daniel, that's certainly true, but the numbers were really stunning. Did you have that on your radar?
I mean, there had been polls, but that there is such a clear two-thirds majority. And I think the surprising thing in the end was how quickly and clearly Viktor Orban conceded, because there was some fear that he was not just going to go, but now it looks like...
the numbers were just too strong, right?
Exactly. But still, this is impressive. I was there in Budapest on the ground and seeing just random people high-fiving, cheering, chanting in the streets, celebrating the end of the mafia state. I think this was a big moment for Europe.
End of the mafia state, you agree?
I think that we shouldn't polarize too much. We can still see that democracy and democratic values within the Hungarian people, society and even state institutions survived, were upheld. Orban clearly conceded his loss, and I think we shouldn't now overdo all the speculation beforehand. I was a bit worried by certain left-wing politicians polarizing before the elections. I think that could have harmed the outcome of Tisza's electoral result in the end, but the Hungarian people were, I think, independent enough and sovereign enough to decide on their own, on their own fate.
One more on Viktor Orban before we move on. Over the past years, he has become the boogeyman in the European Union, but he wasn't all that bad. I mean, in 90% of the cases, he always voted with the European Council. So are we now going back to business?
Well, it's a bit saying 90% he voted with the others. Yeah, whenever his vote didn't matter, but where it did matter, on the unanimous decisions. I mean, I asked the Parliament Research Service before the elections to give me the numbers, and Orban has vetoed more than pretty much everyone else combined. every single unanimous decision we have taken in the last years, first we get a veto from Viktor Orban, and he demands concessions, he blackmails the union. So I think we have never seen anything like him in the history of the European Union.
Right, Sander, do you agree? I mean, after all, pronouncing a veto, that's his right.
Yeah, that's the right of smaller member states. I think in the last years I can agree with Mr. Freund that there was an abuse, especially also for the interests of foreign actors, foreign state, third countries. I think that was worrying. But in the end, we need this veto to defend the rights of smaller countries as a principle. In the case of Hungary, I think I worked alongside Fidesz during many years when I was a parliamentary advisor here in the institutions. And back then they were really aligning always with the Juncker Commission, with the in the first years with the von der Leyen Commission. So I don't think they're the ones always blocking EU policy.
Not always blocking. He did block everything on Ukraine, basically. Yeah. Is this the beginning of a new dawn? Is spring coming to Brussels? What's going to be the vibe here in this town?
I mean, the veto-in-chief is now gone. So I hope clearly that now there is a real willingness to act. But I also hope that member states understand that we cannot let this happen ever again. We should not allow a second Orban to now emerge, either because he comes back one day or someone else follows in his footsteps. I mean, that a single guy can basically block an entire union, can risk our security, and uses the veto not to defend his or the Hungarian interest, but to just basically blackmail and extort from us. This is something that we should not let happen ever again, so we need reform.
We need reform?
No, I think we need to keep the unanimity principle as such. The treaties enshrine this principle not because it's an idea of some Brussels bureaucrat. Yeah. It was really well thought out because smaller member states need to be defended against larger member states through qualified majority voting, overruling their national interests. Myself, hailing from a small member state, the Netherlands, know very well what this could mean.
Small but powerful.
Small but powerful, but nevertheless, I think we need to defend the smaller member states' national sovereignty as well.
How confident
to be really clear, Péter Magyar was elected on a national sovereignty electoral program, and I think it's a bit weird if we act now as if nothing of such
That's a good
happened.
point. How confident are you that Péter Magyar will actually change the dynamics and not throw in the veto?
I mean, already he has changed the dynamics, right? If you look at the relationship that Péter Magyar has with people like Donald Tusk, with Emmanuel Macron now, they talk, they call each other on the phone. We haven't seen that with Viktor Orban in month and month. So already there is a different relationship. And I think he has been very clear that he wants a constructive relationship with the European Union. I think it's clear that the veto on the 90 billion for Ukraine will go away, and we will be able to help Ukraine also financially now. And I think, having been there in Budapest on the ground on Sunday, when he said things like that he is going to have this constructive relationship, that he wants to join the European Public Prosecutor, jointly work against corruption, there were cheers from tens of thousands of people screaming, Europe, Europe. So I think this is very different than what we have seen in the last 16 years from Viktor Orban.
Of course, what Mr. Freund is speaking about is very important, but that was what I was pleading in favor of. We need coordinated unity, not forced unity, not a forced unity forced upon smaller member states. We need coordination, speaking with other heads of government, and that's what Péter Magyar is doing now. That's very positive, but that doesn't mean we need to get rid of the unanimity principle, and I really doubt that Péter Magyar would agree with Mr. Freund to get rid of the unanimity principle, because he was elected as a national sovereigntist, and we have a Hungarian parliament now. So I was a bit surprised to see left-wing and liberal politicians cheering for a new Hungarian parliament entirely composed out of right-wing, center-right, a national conservative, nationalist and ultra-nationalist parties. There's no social democrat, green or liberal party left. So I think this conservative mandate given by the Hungarian voters is very clear and should also be respected in the European Union. And we have to work together to coordinate with Péter Magyar, and I'm very happy that he will unblock the 90 billion euro for Ukraine. Yeah. But we shouldn't do as if he's now like a Volt or a Green MEP pleading in favor of a European federation.
Your thoughts on this, Daniel?
Well, I mean, having spoken with actually lots of Hungarians on the ground, this is not a conservative vote. I mean, most people in this election voted for Europe, voted for democracy, voted for the rule of law, and voted to kick Viktor Orban out. This is what motivated most of those people that now voted actually for Péter Magyar. And the big question now for him is basically if he is going to represent that voter base or not. Because many people actually voted in this election with the hope that they will be able to cast their vote that they really want to cast in 4 years' time. Once democracy has been restored, once there is independent media, once there is rule of law in the country. This was not about a conservative agenda. This was about getting rid of Orban.
All right. Let me stop you there as we are just getting warmed up here, as you have noticed. Now it's time for our viewers to get a real flavor of the European Parliament chamber, where members ask each other questions. And sometimes it can get heated. That means it's time for you both to challenge each other directly, just as you do in the hemicycle behind us. So let's get started. And Sander, the floor is yours.
Yes, Mr. Freund, you're really pleading in favor of getting rid of unanimity. What would you do in a future situation with the Greens in Germany, being a coalition party, in a coalition in Germany, in Berlin, having this coalition force a European Council decision upon them to, for instance, go to war, like in the past on Iraq or Iran? How would your party in that case react? Would you agree with such a stance being imposed on the German government to go to war by an EU decision?
Well, I mean, I'm a Democrat. I'm being outvoted here in the European Parliament on an almost daily basis. That's how it goes. This is democracy. I'm not pleading for a veto here in the European Parliament. Imagine if among us 720 members of the European Parliament, we would have to strike consensus. We would have to reach unanimity on every decision. This House would be completely dysfunctional. And it's a little bit similar among 27 in the Council. So yeah, I would accept decisions that go against my beliefs. I can fight for them, but at the end we vote, and I accept that if we vote by majority, I can lose.
All right. Are you happy with that?
Yeah, no, that basically means abolishing the national sovereignty of the German Bundestag over its foreign policy and military policy.
That's a different question, and I want Daniel to ask Sander.
Well, my question is basically, I mean, you have said that, the veto needs to remain. But if you look, for example, on the process of accession of a new member state, and I could even say, taking a unanimous vote at the end, maybe we keep that for now. But do we need 150 unanimous votes in the process where every single question needs to be opened by unanimity, needs to be closed by unanimity? I mean, isn't 150 vetoes or unanimous decision on a decision like that a bit exaggerated? Can't we bring that down to maybe one in the end?
The current treaty already has a passerelle clause to deal with such certain issues. I think we can find solutions there without doing away with national sovereignty and unanimity principle. And I will repeat myself, but Péter Magyar in Hungary yesterday said that he's opposed to a quick accession, for instance, for Ukraine. So he wants to say about every step in the process, opening of every chapter. So I don't think most smaller member states would agree to your approach there.
Follow up, Daniel?
Well, I think at the end we have to decide whether we want a European Union that is still able to act in a world, with Trump, with Xi, with Putin, whether we're just a playing ball for the big guys, or whether we get a seat at the table and a voice that is actually heard. You speak a lot about sovereignty and, our capacity to act, and I actually think we only have that if we're able to speak with one voice, and if we have the capacity to act, not one single European blocking us from that. How do you respond to that?
I think we need to speak with one voice, but not through forced unity, but through coordinated unity. The European Union was able to act after the Russian criminal invasion of Ukraine in 2022. The EU acted upon that, provided support. So we shouldn't do as if the European Union was helpless with the unanimity principle. This is false. I think in the future we can even, your stance could even undermine support for the European Union and membership by bringing in this bomb of qualified majority voting, alienating smaller member states and creating more resentment among politicians, maybe even among Péter Magyar in Hungary, but also in my own member state, the Netherlands. If you impose qualified majority voting, having France and your own member state, Germany, with a few others imposing their foreign policy or a military policy will upon my voters in the regions, because you spoke about Budapest. I think that the population of capitals does not reflect the general population in EU member states or their stances. And I think the large majority of voters in the countryside and in regions want to uphold the unanimity principle to make sure that every voter in every region and every member state is heard. And these voters know very well we have to defend ourselves against foreign threats by third states and third countries.
Sander, I give you the last question.
Yes. Mr. Freund, are you not worried? I already said it before, but aren't you worried that abolishing the unanimity principle will create resentment and alienate a lot of Europeans in these smaller member states having other stances than maybe majorities in larger member states, for instance, the Hungarian population, but also in the Netherlands or in Latvia, if we go towards qualified majority voting?
Well, I mean, you mentioned Latvia, and I think the Baltic states are an interesting example. You know, they came out of Soviet rule, joined the European Union, and I think for a long time for them, the veto was in a way the guarantee, you know, that something like in the Soviet Union doesn't happen again.
Exactly.
But the problem being that since the full-scale invasion in Ukraine, the Baltic states are realizing that if you have someone like Viktor Orban in the EU that wields the veto, if all of a sudden you have unmarked Russian soldiers coming over the border into Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, well, then Orban becomes a security threat because he can block any kind of reaction. We don't even have an opinion on war crimes committed in Ukraine if Orban puts his veto in this, because we can't have a foreign policy decision.
You're still reasoning in old terms, because Orban now is
but
out,
I mean, there will be others.
See how entrenched this thought was.
But the problem is then, you know, that veto that can be, in a way, the protector of sovereignty can also become the supreme security threat. And that is the situation why I think we should get rid of it.
All right, we've heard the views from our guests. Now it's time to bring in a new voice. I'd like to bring in European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen now. In a press conference this week, she commented on the outcome of the Hungarian election and gave a hint of what could come next in Brussels. Here's what she said. Take a listen.
We should also look at the lessons learned inside the European Union. For example, I think moving to qualified majority voting in foreign policy is an important way to avoid systematic blockages as we've seen in the past. And we should use the momentum now really to move forward on that topic.
Sander, your thoughts on this?
I think this is an example of a prepared, politically prepared, bureaucratically prepared, badly timed power grab by the European Commission, which has a lot to do about its own transparency and legitimacy among European voters in this era. I think that's what they should work on and not work towards abolishing national sovereignty on foreign policy, on military interventions, because as was said, military operations, we have NATO and the EU, and we have seen that national democratic change is possible in Hungary, that the democratic will of Hungarian voters corrected the problems we had in the European Council on support for Ukraine last support bill.
Did I hear that right? Power grab of the European Commission?
I think it's quite the opposite. And you speak about the democratic will of the people. You know, if you look at an issue like whether large corporations should pay their fair share of taxes, you have an overwhelming majority of Europeans in every single member state that want that. But we cannot get there because a single member state, maybe one that has a very favorable tax regime for large corporations and helps to evade billions of taxes being paid, can put their veto on these kind of minimum taxation levels, for example. So this is another example where the veto is basically going against democracy, is going against the will of the vast majority of Europeans.
All right, we'll come back to this. Let's take a break here on The Ring. We'll be back with more after this. Welcome back to The Ring, Euronews' weekly debate show. I'm Stefan Grobe, and I'm joined by Daniel Freund from the Greens and Sander Smit from the European Conservatives and Reformists. And the idea here is to bring the European Parliament's debates to your living room. This week, we're focusing on a key question in this building. Is the EU in need of wide-ranging reforms or not? One issue is the role of the EU High Representative, Kaja Kallas. She heads the European External Action Service with its 140-plus EU delegations worldwide and employs more than 4,000 staff. But Kallas, like all her predecessors, has no direct control over national armies. There's also no single centralized EU foreign policy budget. Funding is split across institutions and member states. And Kallas and her service must rely on a consensus of the 27 member states for foreign policy decisions. Is this efficient at all?
No, it's not. I mean, why do we pay 28 different embassies in cities like Beijing or Washington? I mean, let's at least start with the consular service. If a European needs a new passport, needs a birth certificate, something, why do we need 28 different administrations that they can turn to? Isn't one enough? That would be much cheaper for European taxpayers.
Sander, your thoughts?
Well, there's a matter maybe of inefficiency in diplomacy, but militarily we already have Article 5 of NATO, Article 42 in the EU, and we should not, as an EU, start to double NATO infrastructure. We need to build on the European pillar, I think, jointly, but that's on a military capacity basis, not on the command structure. And I really would warn the European Union against assuming a role of commanding an EU army. That would be very dangerous and create a lot of resentment.
But foreign policy, I mean, we're hearing every now and then that the Commission President is sort of undermining the High Representative by taking too much out of the foreign policy portfolio in her own hands. Why are we having a High Representative at all then?
I mean, it is a bit of a strange animal because we didn't, when we last made these treaties, we didn't fully commit to have an EU foreign minister. The governments wanted more control, so she is half in the Commission, half in the Council, and that is precisely what creates this awkward position. But if you say, you know, this is about sovereignty, look at the sovereignty of a place like Greenland. Greenland doesn't have sovereignty facing Donald Trump and the American administration. They had sovereignty when Europe was together and said, if you touch Greenland, you're gonna, you know, have the joint EU against you. That's when we protected the sovereignty of Greenland. Not every small country for itself. Places like Luxembourg, like Estonia, even a place like Germany doesn't have sovereignty in the face of China, Russia, or the US. Only together are we strong enough.
The case of Greenland perfectly shows
that we're not a big
EU is
player
able
globally. And he mentioned that earlier. We're not
I think the Greenland case perfectly shows that if it's necessary, like the Ukraine war, at the start of the Ukraine war, the EU is willing and able to act with the current treaties jointly. We saw that on Greenland, we saw it on Ukraine, on the invasion by Russia. But if we look at Iran and the stances, the different stances of EU member states, Pedro Sanchez, maybe also Italy, but also France, Germany and other member states, on the Israeli-American intervention against Iran is entirely divergent. And we saw this divergence also in the EU institutions. So it's doomed to fail to have a forced unity of foreign policy. In this way, we need coordination, and Greenland and the Ukraine cases show that the EU is already able, within the current treaties, to act if it's necessary. Because the EU, rightly so, defended Greenland. I led a delegation of the Fisheries Committee last September to Greenland to also strengthen our ties with the fisheries sector there. We have a huge fisheries agreement there. And I really can only commend these cases as an example for the future.
So it's versus speaking with one voice versus a forced unity.
I don't know where this forced unity comes from. The question is just if people like the two of us, members of the European Parliament, actually have any kind of say on these questions. Because in the current setup, it's left to the 27 governments. We here adopt resolutions, but quite honestly, who cares? But the question is, if the European Parliament, the directly elected representatives from all those citizens in Europe that send us here to the European Parliament, whether this Parliament has a role in the foreign policy decisions, in the diplomatic relations. We got a say on trade, so some elements are there, but others are not. And it makes more sense if you have all the tools in your hand. Von der Leyen can threaten on boycotts and sanctions, but she doesn't have the other tools that Putin or Trump or Xi have in their hands, and that makes her weaker.
Well, now it's time to move on to our fifth and final round, where we continue our conversation. Now it's time for something different. I'm going to ask you a set of questions, and you can answer only with a yes or no, okay? So let's start with a simple one. Is Orban's defeat a turning point for the EU, Sander?
I think very much so, in the sense that we can now provide the Ukraine with...
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, good. Will Magyar be an undisputed ally of Brussels?
No.
No?
No.
No. Well, you guys agree on something here. Is unanimity making the EU weak on the world stage?
Yes.
Absolutely not.
Would removing veto power make the EU more democratic?
Absolutely not.
Yes.
And is the future of the EU federal?
No, it's confederate.
It is.
Is the EU a credible actor on the world stage these days?
Yes.
Halfway, but rather
Okay.
yes.
Okay. Does Europe need a single foreign policy voice?
No.
Yes.
Is this the moment for radical EU reform?
Yes.
No. Let's keep it the way it is.
That's a good one. Are national governments the problem in EU decision-making?
When you sit in the Parliament, that's how it looks like, yeah.
Absolutely not, and national governments have the most direct mandate in the European Council.
No. We're elected on EU election programs. National governments are national elections, so they have no direct mandate for EU affairs.
Our national elections have the highest turnout of voters, the most direct
Depends
media
where you look,
attention,
no.
and I think in the principle of subsidiarity enshrined in the treaties, we need to look upon these national parliaments as the prime expression of the national will.
Fascinating conversation here for a yes or no question. That final answer brings us to the end of this edition of The Ring. Thanks again to Daniel Freund and Sander Smit for a lively conversation here from the European Parliament. Thanks to our audience at home. If you like, you can continue the conversation by sending us your comments to thering@euronews.com. That's it for today. I'm Stefan Grobe. Take care and see you soon here on Euronews.